A few years ago, I started meditating regularly. Although I had dabbled in meditation, although I had done meditation in yoga classes or at various retreats, it wasn't until a few years ago when I downloaded a meditation app and made a commitment to meditate every day for 30 days that I really began to see the benefits of meditation. After 30 days, I felt different. There was a stillness that I felt. There was an openness that I could actually experience. And at that point, I was all in. I have continued to meditate regularly every day, and I encourage my clients to do the same. And I'm encouraging you to do that as well if you don't already. Now, we have lots of different viewpoints on meditation. We hear about it, some of us dabble in it. But today, on this episode, I am interviewing George Peterson. And George Peterson just wrote a book called Thrive: How to Use Meditation to Overcome the Things That Are Holding You Back. George is a meditation teacher. He leads retreats on meditation. And as you listen to our conversation, I think you will see why he does what he does. I also think you will be inspired to try meditation again. And I certainly recommend you purchasing his book and following him. I also encourage you to create a meditation practice that works for you, because it is a really powerful inward journey that I think all of us can benefit from. I'll invite you to sit back and listen in as George Peterson shares his story. This is It Just Takes One. One person, one experience, one moment to change your life. George, welcome to It Just Takes One.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Grateful to be here.
As we were just getting ready to hit record, we were talking about what it felt like to have your book in your hand now that it's completed. So I said, let me hit record so we can share that with the listeners. Go ahead and share what it's been like to actually be able to hold this book in your hand.
Yeah, it feels really good to hold it in my hand, especially, it took me about 4 years, right, to write the book. The problem is that for the first 3 years, I sort of kicked and screamed my way through the process and, didn't put in, I think, the amount of action it takes, to actually get a book from that beginning point all the way to its end point. And, luckily, one of the things that really helped me, I think, bring this book to fruition is by having other people around me who could help me see to believe that the things I wanted in my life were possible, right? To have some mentors themselves who had written books, right? Who could show me the lay of the land, right? And one of those things that I learned from my teachers was that I had to have skin in the game. So what happened for me is, I'd been writing for about 3 years and it was just like the book was there, but I just kept changing and I wasn't happy with it. And it was just like I wasn't putting again enough time into it to really, bring it to fruition. And so my teacher suggested I put some skin in the game. And what I did was I told one of my meditation students that I would pay them $2,000 if I didn't get the book, like the majority of it that I had to turn into you guys done by August 31st. This was last year. And, once I gave that person the $2,000 check and told them they could cash it if the book wasn't done by that day, it's crazy. In 3 months, that was in May of 2023. By August of 2023, I had written more in 3 months than in the 3 years prior to that. And so it feels really good now to have that book done, um, to have given myself a deadline, right? I think if we're completing a goal, we need, right, the goal, we need the deadline, but we also need the accountability, right? And now to see that whole process through and to now, like I was telling you, to have a book, like if somebody, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I realized maybe not everybody can afford to come learn to meditate with somebody like me in person, to become a self-sufficient meditator. And I wanted to give people a way of being able to benefit from the practice in a very real world way who might not be able to come have that experience with me. So it's nice that now I'm able to do that. If somebody says, "Hey, I want to meditate," but they don't seem like maybe they're all in and investing in a meditation training like the one that I teach, I could be like, "Hey, read my book." And a lot of times the book is a gateway drug, for more people to actually come do the in-person things that I'm doing with me.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you mentioned motivation comes in a lot of forms. So paying out $2,000,
Hmm.
with the intention of getting it done so you actually wouldn't have to spend that 2,000 is certainly a great motivator. And also, I think the listeners, people listening to this can relate to that because a lot of them have expressed that they had an idea for a book or they have started, but it's been sitting in a drawer for years, or they just couldn't get themselves motivated to finish it. So, your point of needing accountability and creating motivation wherever it comes is incredibly valuable. So congratulations to you on the success of having it out and ready to start doing its work.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, and I mean it was essential too, for me to have, a group like you and your team to help me get the book from A to Z, right? Because obviously, like I had a sort of rough idea of what that process looked like, but it was much easier to sort of outsource some of those things to you and your team because, my time's better spent, teaching meditation, doing a keynote, hosting a meditation retreat, than it is doing all those or taking care of all those fine details that you guys took care of for me. So I'm eternally grateful for that.
Yeah, we made a good team, that's for sure. So listeners, let's talk about the book. So you know the book that we're talking about. Um, George wrote a book called Thrive: How to Use Meditation to Overcome the Things That Are Holding You Back. So, George, you've been talking about meditation. Let's just get right into it and talk about, let's start big picture, 30,000 foot of what meditation is. And then let's walk down through how you actually found your way to meditation and why it worked for you and how you actually grew into this field. But start big picture because a lot of people hear what meditation is, they don't really fully understand it. And there might even be some people out there that are skeptical of meditation. So just on a big scale, what do you believe meditation to be? And for somebody that might be skeptical, what would you say to them about meditation and what it can do for you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, first of all, so much for asking me this question and for having me on the show. You know, I think that one of the reasons I wrote this book is, I'm an individual in long-term recovery. What that means is for me, I had an addiction to alcohol, to drugs. Back in 2011, I got sober, and that's when my journey with meditation began. And, what I discovered is along with all the numerous studies that are out there showing you the benefits of meditation, there wasn't a lot of clear cut information on how to actually meditate. And so, I was just, and for me today, one of the reasons that I wrote this book too is because I've, throughout the years, overheard people's frustrations with meditation. And, one of the things I remember hearing from one of my teachers when I first learned to meditate was that saying, maybe if your listeners have heard it, it's there's no wrong way to meditate.
Mm.
And it's actually not entirely true though, right? Which is a big reason why I wrote the book, because I wanted to share this message with more people. Because, if I'm standing on my head with almond butter on my face and calling that meditation, then I'm not going to get the same benefits as like learning one-on-one from a trained teacher. I think that the book is obviously really helpful for people, right? It's going to help onboard them to the practice of meditation, but I still don't think anything can really place that one-on-one in-person instruction from a teacher. And the way I sort of describe the book in comparison to my live in-person training and what I teach on my retreats is the book is like the Vespa, if you're familiar with like a Vespa, right? It will get you to your destination. It might be a little slower. It's not maybe going to be as fast as the luxury car, but the meditation training that I teach in my in-person training and on my retreats, I call that the Tesla, right? And so, you know, what I just discovered is that there is a there's a lot of misconceptions, right, that are preventing many people out there from meditating, right? One of the biggest, right, that when I talk about meditation, I like to talk about is, I used to, before I left my 9 to 5 to teach meditation full time, I used to work at Trader Joe's. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Trader
Of
Joe's.
course, yeah.
And I would always have, yeah, I would always have customers come to my line and talk to me about stress or problems they were having. And I would suggest, at that time, I hadn't written a book. So I'd suggest they go get my meditation teacher's book. Now I can suggest people go get my book, which is nice. But they would always tell me, well, no, I can't, even with a book, I'm not going to be able to do it because I have a monkey mind. I'm not sure if you've heard that term, but they would always tell me they have a monkey mind, which if your listeners aren't familiar, it means that their mind felt like it was like a drunken monkey erratically swinging from branch to branch. Right. And the reason our mind actually feels like that is because the mind's always looking for a greater possibility of happiness. Right. That's why it keeps jumping from one thought to the next. It's sort of like if you were at a house party, right, and you were listening to music downstairs and then all of a sudden, out of the corner of your ear, the music upstairs, right? There was maybe different music upstairs playing. You heard your favorite song playing. It would take no effort on your mind's part to turn you in that direction and start walking you upstairs because the mind's always looking for that greater possibility of happiness. That's why it's jumping constantly, right? Dot to the next, right? And so people would say, oh, I have a monkey mind. I can't meditate. But the problem really wasn't the monkey mind. It was that they had never been properly trained to meditate, right? Concluding you have a monkey mind when you've never learned meditation's proper mechanics. The way I describe it is, the Olympics just recently happened, right? And it'd be like if you tried to go out there and participate in any of those Olympic sports, right, with these Olympic athletes, and then not being close to as good as they were at it, and then claiming something like, let's say you went to go play with the United States Olympic soccer team, right? And then you went out there, you weren't very good. And then afterwards you claimed you had monkey feet, right? That wouldn't make any sense, would it? Right? No, because you haven't been trained the way they have. You haven't practiced the amount of time that they have, right? So obviously you're not going to be as good as they are, right? So claiming that we have a monkey mind when we've never been taught meditation's proper mechanics is the same thing, right? Another example, my teacher once said, he said, that's like going to play, piano for the first time, not being good at it and claiming that you have monkey fingers,
Mm.
right? And so for me, I wanted to create a book that would start to introduce people to some of the mechanics that I teach in my live in-person training. It's not exactly what I teach in my in-person training, but it was inspired by everything that I teach in my in-person training, which is a technique that actually dates back to ancient India over 6,000 years,
Mm.
right? So the mechanics have been tried and tested for thousands of years. And most people don't know this. I'll end with this, but there's actually two main forms of meditation. Uh, and people don't know this. A lot of people are just familiar with the monastic approach, right? And they don't understand that for just as long in ancient India, there's what they call the householder approach, right? Which has been taught in tandem in India with the monastic approach. And so if, me and you aren't monks.
Mm.
So if me and you try to practice a meditation style that was really made for a monk, our experiences are going to seem very difficult. And so what I try to teach people in the book is more of the householder approach, which in India is a term which means everyday person like me and you who still wants to experience meditation's benefits but doesn't want to be a monk. So in other words, the meditation that I teach is more for people like us, like busy people with busy lives, who have real life responsibilities, right? Who need a real world way to start benefiting from the practice. And, One of the principles I talk about in the book is how we're not meditating to get good at meditation. We're meditating to get good at life. And I say that because all of the meditations that you're going to do, right, especially once you learn the proper mechanics of the practice, what they're really doing is they're preparing you to better deal with the inevitable twists and turns that each day is going to present to you.
Hmm. That's actually so interesting. I never knew that. I really appreciate you pointing out the difference in those two styles. And you answered a question I was going to ask, which is, how do you answer somebody when they say that meditation just feels so hard? And in part, certainly the monkey mind, but to your point, that it may seem hard because we're trying to do a practice that really isn't matching our lifestyle. It's, the monastic approach versus this householder approach, which I didn't even know that. So that's a great piece of information. So you teach this householder approach. You've been doing this for a long time. What are some of the benefits that you personally have experienced from meditation and that you have seen with your students who have practiced this householder approach more regularly?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could obviously share a lot of antidotes from my students and myself. One of the biggest things that I would say meditation does is, I talk about in my in-person training how progress in meditation is measured by your ability to better adapt to the day's changes, right? And so life's demands are coming, whether we meditate or not, right? And so the only difference is that if I start meditating, right, the demands aren't going to stop coming. It's just I'm going to get better at dealing with them, right? And so what that means is I'm going to be less overwhelmed by the day's demands. I'm going to have more of what one of my teachers used to call unoverwhelmability, the ability to be less overwhelmed by the day's demands, right? And so I have more of what I call adaptation energy, the ability to better adapt, right? And so, you know, what that looks like is like, I have more rest today to deal with the day's stress, right? So I might wake up. I always say, like, meditation is not going to stop my car from not starting, but it will change the way I respond to it. And so if I'm not meditating, I would listen to a TED talk where there was a neuroscientist who said that human beings are dealing with the same amount of stress in the last 25 years that for the 250 years prior to that, they used to deal with over the course of their entire lifetime in one day.
Hmm.
So essentially, in one day now, we're dealing with a similar amount of stress, right, as some people used to deal with over the course of their entire lifetime. And
Hmm.
so he was saying that the problem with this is, the third law of thermodynamics states that any system, which includes the human nervous system, which is overstimulated like this, it moves into a state of disorder and imbalance. This is why we're all walking around in a state of disorder and imbalance because our body and minds are racked with stress. The problem with stress, right, is it leads us to making what I call the instant gratification choice, right? It's what leads us to want to take the edge off of something like alcohol or, binge watching Netflix and not dealing with our responsibilities because we just feel too overwhelmed, right, to deal with what we have going on, right? And so the thing about meditation is that it de-excites the nervous system, right? And so when we de-excite the nervous system, it moves more into a state of order and balance, right? And then we have more units of rest to deal with the day's stress. So like when we get up in the morning and we were maybe planning on sleeping in and our neighbor starts, mowing the lawn too early and it wakes us up rather than having to, stick our head out the window and yell something at him that we're going to regret later on, right? We're able to, adapt to that, right? And so, we can all do this, but eventually as life's demands keep coming, right, we get too overwhelmed, right? And then eventually we snap, right? And then we go into the fight or flight, and then we can't sleep because our body starts producing a stress chemical called cortisol, right? Which keeps us up all night. And then it's just like, then we don't get good sleep. So we don't get good rest from our sleep. So we have even less rest the next day to deal with our stress. And then this is just like you see the cycle, right? That you get caught in when you don't have enough rest to deal with your stress. And so meditation gives us more units of rest, right? So again, we're not as overwhelmed by the demands and we can adapt to them better.
It's so good. And I think that is what so many people can relate to as they're listening to you, of how it is something that isn't, I'll say woo woo, it's not an out there practice. It's actually a way of developing that stress response to create an opportunity for your nervous system to relax, to go into that parasympathetic mode so that it can de-stress and to your point, open up your capacity to handle whatever is coming your way.
Exactly, exactly. And the way I explain it is, there's a reason, this is happening in my life and it's happening, I think, in a lot of people in the world's life that I was feeling stuck,
Mhm.
right? There is a reason that I kept taking everything in my life personally, right? There's a reason that couldn't see that life was going down for me, not to me,
Mhm.
right? And it's because I had the accumulated calcified stress in my nervous system, right? And when we have that, it keeps us seeing, it keeps us reacting in the same old ways, right? And the problem with this is, if we keep getting triggered back into the past, right, we can't be present, right? Because what happens is our body stores up memories related to stressful situations from our past. So if you've ever seen the movie The Silver Linings Playbook, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that movie.
Bradley Cooper, yeah.
Yeah, there's a scene in the movie where Bradley Cooper gets triggered by a song he hears in his therapist's office. You don't know why he's so upset. And then later you see him walking down the hallway of his home, and it's a flashback. He was walking down the hallway, he hears a song on the bathroom, and he goes into the bathroom, and his wife's in the shower with another man, right? And so the reason he was so triggered is because that was a memory related to something very stressful from his past, right? And so the stress our body stores and it holds on to it has that negative emotional charge. In other words, anytime we experience, right, any sort of memory related to those stressful situations from our past, they actually cause us to go right back into the fight or flight response. So we can be like, for instance, you could be like trying to be more present, right? You could be trying to be more mindful, right? You could be out in the park, let's say, in a flower garden, taking time to be more present and smell the roses. And then let's say the next set of flowers in the flower garden over from the roses is tulips, right? And it just so happens out of the corner of your eye, you catch the tulips while you're trying to be present and stop and smell the roses. Well, just so happens that the tulips were the last flowers that your partner gave you before they unexpectedly told you that they were leaving you.
Mhm.
So here you are trying to be present, and next thing you know, you're seeing the tulips, and it's taking you right back from 2024 into 2014 when that happened, or 2004,
Mhm.
right? And so when we keep getting triggered back into the past like this, we can't be the best version of ourselves because we can't be present, right? And what I learned from my teacher was uh, they say time's our most valuable asset. It's actually not true, right? Presence is our most valuable asset because you could have all the time in the world, but if you can't be present, you can't make the most of your time. And so it's just helped me be more present, right? Meditation. It's also one of the biggest things it does, I would say, better than most other interventions, is it neutralizes those stress triggers. So, like in Bradley Cooper's example, you could hear that song that used to trigger the hell out of you. Now you don't react to it anymore, right? And so these are the type of like real world ways that meditation has really changed the way that I'm able to show up in my life.
Really, really, really good. Let's dive deeper so people get a little better sense of how you actually came to this. You mentioned earlier that you had been addicted to drugs and alcohol at one point, and that you've had some teachers. But let's kind of give that story a little bit more depth and share a little bit about how you actually came to meditation and knew that it was something that was helping you.
Yeah. So I wrote about this a little in the book. My journey with meditation sort of began way before I ever started meditating. My mom used to talk about meditation while I was growing up, and not the type of meditation that I do now, but she would mention meditation and words like karma, and I always thought it was just like it was something that I was not interested in at all. She had a whiteboard at my house. She would write like the chakra of the day on the whiteboard, and she would try to like get us to be into it, and I just wasn't into it at all. And my mom actually, she had like this spiritual book that she always used to keep in her car with her. And she once, when I got suspended from school, she made me write a book report on that spiritual book. And it's funny because later on, I actually went on and studied with that teacher once I got sober and began my spiritual journey. So it's funny how life works.
Mm.
But
Mm.
yeah, see, the story, and I talk about this also a little in the book that I sometimes tell is, I was born with asthma. They didn't think I was gonna live, and they put me in the NICU. And my mom had to make the hard decision when I was born because, my dad, he was addicted to methamphetamine. He was addicted to alcohol. He was so under the influence when I was born that he couldn't even drive my mom to the hospital. And so he had to have his friend drive her. And so when I was born, my mom had to make the hard decision because she didn't have insurance to not stay with me because she was afraid of the hospital bill she'd rack up by having to stay in the hospital while I was in the NICU. So the first 11 days I was alive, I didn't receive that love, right? And um that attention that a child needs from their parent. And so I felt always this sense growing up, like there was this void inside, that there was something missing, like I was undeserving, unworthy of love. And, for me, I just like it just it it caused me to just feel uncomfortable around people in social settings, like I was never good enough, right? Always trying to live up to some standard that, I thought that I needed to. You know, I tried to do the things I thought you needed me to do in order to be okay. And this is sort of how I lived my life. And then I forget how, but somehow I ended up hanging out with some kids. I grew up at the skate park, and was hanging out at their house one day, and they decided that they we were going to drink some of their parents' alcohol. And I just remember when I drank alcohol for the first time, it was like my life went from black and white to color. That like internal condition that I had always felt like, I felt like I experienced some temporary relief from that for the first time. And so I really liked that effect that was produced by alcohol. And I felt like I had a lot of social anxiety. Like another situation I refer to in the book is, I won't tell the whole story now to give it all away, but I was in a group setting in sixth grade where I looked up to all these kids, and they were like the older eighth grade skateboarder kids who I idolized, and they told a joke about some girl that was something that had to do with something sexual, and I didn't know anything about that. I was in sixth grade. So when the way that I responded to their comment, they could tell that I had no idea what they meant. So everybody in the group started laughing at me. And because of that, going forward, I was afraid to speak up. I had a lot of social anxiety. Most of the time when I was around people, I was just in my head, worried about what people thought about me. And alcohol made that all temporarily go away for a bit. And so, I started drinking a lot. And then, I w was around people at parties who were doing other drugs. And, really what I was in, right, to sort of summarize what I'm trying to tell you right now, is I was in what I learned since getting sober is a state of what I call object referral,
Mm.
right? Where my happiness was dependent upon things outside of myself, right? Because I felt so unhappy on the inside. And I knew no way to change what was going on in the inside except through things on the outside. And so, you know, I was next after that phase of partying, looking for my happiness in a relationship. The girl who I can see, my internet's. Can you still hear me?
Yep, I can still hear you. No problem. I'm just going to clap
Sorry.
because that's where they'll do a little clip there. It just slowed down for a minute. It got a little Darth Vader-ish, but it's good. You're back.
So I was in a state of object referral happiness. My happiness was dependent upon things outside of myself. One of those things that I thought my happiness would be found in was a relationship with the girl I considered the prettiest girl in my high school. And she ended up asking me if I would ever try heroin with her. And I was scared, but it was the prettiest girl in my high school. And at that time, I was really looking for anything that could make me feel better. And these people looked like, the coolest people that I'd ever seen at that time. They were the people who I idolized, right? They were good looking, they had the nice cars. Everybody in high school wanted to be around them. So I wanted to do what they were doing. And I was looking for that outside fix for the inside job, not knowing it at the time. And I tried heroin for the first time at 15, and I just loved it. And it allowed me to feel this sense of ease and comfort that I had never felt before. And, eventually, by my life became one more attempt at using heroin, followed by one more failure. I had been trying to get sober for about 5 years. And one time, I went on a sober camp out. My mom gave me her MP3 player, happened to have one of those guided meditations on it. And I had no idea how to meditate or what was supposed to be happening. But I did like this breathing thing, which I teach a practice called breath work now, which is sort of similar to the breath work that I now teach. I don't know how I thought to do this, but I just started breathing in this way, and it made my body sort of feel like it was tingling, like my foot fell asleep. And it was like the first time I ever felt good in my skin without drugs and alcohol, because I felt that sort of feeling throughout my whole body. And then I just remembered that this time when I got sober, and I took a leap and I called the meditation center who put together those guided meditations. And I told them that I had had this experience in the past where, I felt this tingly feeling that made me feel good in my skin without alcohol and without drugs. And it's the only thing that's really ever made me feel good. And then they were so inspired by my story. They got me on a payment plan I could afford, flew me out to California, got me to a week-long meditation retreat where I learned to meditate. And that's the rest is history.
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, it's an incredible story on so many levels, and I imagine that some of the listeners out there can relate to it on many different levels. Obviously, addiction being something that binds all of us, either us or somebody we know most likely has struggled or is struggling with it. So it's a common experience. And you described it beautifully in terms of looking on the outside, that object referral of looking outside for something to fix what you were feeling on the inside. So I think, thinking of the listeners as they're hearing this and connecting with your story, what I love also is the thread of the parenting of your mother and all these little seeds that she planted that didn't take root until this moment where you had this, just sort of synchronicity of that meditation was there and the breath work happened, and the story follows from there. So really cool to hear the whole story and how it came to be. So you go out and you actually do this meditation week, but you actually continued and you talk from the first time we met, and you mentioned it a couple times today too. You met some teachers. Can you talk a little bit about your teachers and why, just to emphasize again, why having a teacher is really beneficial for somebody that is looking to learn to meditate?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to say too, about the object of all happiness is you talked about the benefits of meditation. The biggest benefits that I've received is that I've shifted from more of a state of object referral happiness to more of a state of what I call self referral happiness, which is an internal state of happiness that's independent of external circumstances.
Mm.
And so, you know, as far as the teacher thing goes, it's funny. I have a podcast. It's called Global Shift Podcast. And on the podcast, I had this guy who was talking about how we have like coaches and teachers in almost every other area of our life, right? But then when it comes to like spirituality or learning to meditate, right? We don't want to pay to hire a teacher, right? Or even the word guru, right? It's got uh people are allergic to that word, right,
Mm.
these days because, some people have taken advantage, right, of their students. And so people don't like that idea of having a guru. But for me, a teacher means like having a coach,
Mm.
right? And just like I wouldn't expect to be able to, again, go play soccer with Olympic athletes if I didn't have a coach, or at least even, I was recently listening to a podcast where they were talking about the power of the internet, and they were talking about how there's somebody, I think he was in the Olympics, he was in the javelin, and they asked him, he won, and they asked him like, how did you get to this point of winning a gold medal? And he said that he didn't have a coach at all. He learned everything from YouTube,
Mm.
and he was self-taught. But even you could say, yeah, he didn't have a coach, YouTube and all the teachers that were on, you needed that. He needed that good orderly direction from somebody, right? To get to the point of winning the gold medal. And the thing is I think meditation is the same, right? I think, can you still hear me? Because my internet is
Yes, I can hear you.
seeming
You're
like
good.
it's not working. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. So, hold on 1 second. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So, so with meditation, I look at it the same, right? We have all these other coaches and teachers and all these other areas of our life. And I think in spirituality, right, when learning to meditate, right, when we have other people who've walked a little bit farther along that path than we have, it can be really beneficial for us. I know for me, getting a teacher, going to that live in-person training with up until that point, I was just using shoddy guesswork to figure out like if meditation was working for me or not, right? And I would meditate because, I think most people meditate because they know they should do it, or because they know it's good for them. And that's why I was meditating. Like I knew it was something that people do when they get sober, but I didn't really know what was supposed to be happening. I didn't really know if I was benefiting from it, right? And so I wasn't consistent, right? Because I hadn't learned meditation's proper mechanics. But I think the biggest thing a teacher can do for you is it took meditation for me out of the I should do because I know it's good for me category,
Mm.
and it put it in the I get to do category where I wake up looking forward to it.
Mm. Mm. Similar with exercise. As a past personal trainer, how to get somebody from I should be doing this to I get to be doing this. And oftentimes it is the fact that they have somebody that's showing them that's showing up with them to help them work through it and give them that orderly construction, like you said.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And for me, you talked about my journey
Mm.
when I learned to meditate. I actually knew on this, it's a 4-day course, right? The meditation course that I teach. And each session's about 2 hours, right? So you get about 8 hours of training, right? And which is obviously going to be a lot more effective than, just learning from an app or, buying a $99 meditation course, where you learn to meditate every day for 10 minutes. I spent 8 hours with a trained teacher who spent, just like myself, now that I became a teacher, I had to spend about 2 to 3,000 hours of training in
Mm.
order to become a teacher, right? So because I received that high level knowledge when I, invested in meditation training, I knew day two of that training that I wanted to become a teacher myself because of the experience that I was being able to have, right, within 2 days of learning to meditate, right? I recently heard this analogy. It's sort of like before you get a teacher, right? It's sort of like the experience of meditating is sort of like if you've never slept in a bed, you've only slept your entire life in an economy seat of an airplane, right? You're gonna get rest, right? You're gonna pass out, right? You're gonna sleep, but the experience is only gonna be so deep, right?
Mm.
But then if you were to one day have the opportunity to sleep in a bed, it would be a much more profound, restful experience. And you'd probably be like, oh my God, like what was that experience I was even having before this? Right?
Right.
And meditation is similar. It's like before you're learned from a trained teacher, it's like sleeping in that economy seat your whole life. Even when you're meditating, yeah, you're having some experiences, but you're also not really sure of how to target those experiences you want to be having. Where like when you learn from a teacher, you learn how to target that experience, right? That we're all trying to have when we meditate, right? And how to keep triggering the sequence that gives your body the higher quality rest so it can start to release the stress, right? And what starts to go on in the body, as you mentioned, is the opposite of what takes place when our body goes into the fight or flight response, right?
Mm.
All the physiological changes that take place in the body when we go into the fight flight response, you can learn how to have the opposite of those start happening in your body when you start meditating, right? And when you learn from a teacher, you learn how to target that experience, right? And so that's like going from that economy seat of the airplane and then getting to sleep in the bed. It's a much more profound, powerful experience.
Hmm. I'm wondering, we didn't talk about this beforehand, so feel free to say it won't work, but obviously we're not going to get the experience of 8 hours until we come and do this with you. But if listeners right now are interested in just getting a sense of this, is there something you could actually do with us right now to show us what this experience is like? Maybe a breath work piece or something that we could actually experience you teaching us something?
Yeah, so the breath work that I teach is different from the meditation. The meditation itself, and the reason I wrote the book is because it's not even the book, like I said, is you know, not as ideal as learning one-on-one, like in person from a teacher. And that's actually why, like I don't just have something necessarily that I could lead the listeners through right now that's going to be able to make their experience more easy and enjoyable. I can give them, right, a few uh, tips that might help to make their experience more easy,
Mm.
right? And so the first one is that you don't want to hold the position during your meditation, right? And so what I mean by that is you want to sit comfortably with back support. And so everybody thinks when you say that, but what about the pictures? Like if I Google meditation, I'm going to see somebody with my legs crossed and my back perfectly straight and my fingers touching, even though I have no idea why my fingers are touching together like this, right? But instead, those types of meditations, again, this goes back to the monastic approach or more designed, right? For people who are monks, right? But again, we're not monks. And so in my meditation training, something you can do no matter what style of meditation you're practicing that can start to make it more easy right away is you can start to sit comfortably. Like you're watching your favorite TV show, right? Like you're Netflix and chilling, right? So that would help right away start to make meditation more easy for people, right?
Mm.
And then another um, tip is that you don't want to be austere, right? Which is a word that means stiff or rigid. So you don't want to be stiff or rigid in your body. By first, you want to sit comfortably, but also again, you don't want to hold the position. So in other words, if you get uncomfortable while you're meditating, you're allowed to move and make yourself more comfortable, right? If you have an itch, you can scratch the itch. You're not a bad meditator for moving, right? If you have to cough or sneeze, don't go into convulsions trying to hold it back, right? And so, but then you don't want to be stiff or rigid in your mind, right? Meaning you don't want to try to use one of meditation's most common instructions, which is focus, right? We hear this word all the time associated with meditation, But the problem is anytime I'm being asked to focus in meditation, I'm being asked to employ some degree of mental activity, right? And so the mind thinks involuntarily, like the heart beats involuntarily. So trying to get my mind a command to stop thinking is like trying to give my heart a command to stop beating. It's impossible, right? And so what I teach people is that we can't stop our thoughts, but we can learn to transcend them, which is go beyond them. And so then the third thing is you don't want to resist your thoughts, which means like, if you think about your mind as an ocean, right? Imagine that the waves on the surface of the ocean are like the 60 to 90,000 thoughts a day we have as a human being. And so that's about 3 thoughts per second, right? Imagine, there's a lot of meditation techniques out there that are called focused attention meditation techniques where they use a point of focus like the breath. And then every time a thought comes in and they get off of their point of focus, they bring their attention back to that, right? But that's like, if you think about that analogy of the ocean, that's like using a point of focus to try to stop the waves. But if you've ever gone to the ocean and tried to stop the waves, you know that experience is not very easy to do, right? So there's another style of meditation called open monitoring, which is more like mindfulness. And so, like, like I know somebody who, whenever a thought comes into their mind in meditation, they put it on a leaf and they let it go down a stream, right? So they're witnessing the thought and they're letting it go. But the problem with this is, you know, it's like if you go back to that analogy of the ocean, it's like trying to be unaffected by the waves on the surface of the ocean, right? Which is not very easy to do either, right? And so, what I teach is for people how to go from the busy surface of their mind where all the waves are down to the bottom of the ocean. Because if you think about the ocean, do you know what a cross section picture of the ocean is?
I can imagine that.
Yeah, it's like a picture that looks at the top and bottom at the same time. You would see that even when there's all these crazy waves on the surface, at the bottom where it's 500 feet deep, the ocean is still calm. It's still, it's silent, right? And so, same with your mind. Underneath all those thoughts, there's like what I call the quiet zone or the inner reservoir of bliss that we all have inside. The problem is that most people haven't been taught how to go from the busy surface of their mind, right, down to that quiet zone where the bliss is. And so, the technique that I teach in my book is the beginning steps of how to trigger that experience, right, on purpose when you sit down and meditate. And that's what I teach in my in-person training, but it's not something that I can just be like, hey, do this and you'll start having that experience. But even if you're doing guided meditation, like, and you're trying to sit like a monk, like maybe just try to sit comfortably. And I think that that alone could make a big difference.
So good. Thank you for that. And I appreciate that. Three really good tips. You actually go into those and some other pieces of the MEDI technique that you teach in the book without giving all of that away, because I think people are getting a sense of the skill and the knowledge and the depth of what you teach. If they wanted to find you or they wanted to come to one of your retreats, how do they find you?
Yeah. So they could go to my website, georgespeterson.com. Everything is in there. The retreats, I'm just setting up some new ones now for right after the new year. So a bunch next year. I just got back from doing a retreat in Italy. We'd already done a retreat earlier this year, um, as well here in the United States in a national park. And so our retreats this year are over, but there'll be some more next year. I have a 90-day coaching program too, which part of it is you actually get my learn to in-person learn to meditate course as a part of that program. It's called Thrive and Transform. And so it goes well with the book. And some of the other things that are in the book, which are the principles that I share that people can use that you learn when you learn to meditate, but they help you to overcome the things that are holding you back in your life. And so we're going to go into some of that stuff. And there's in my coaching program, there's like in between the biweekly group and one-on-one coaching, people are going to get to do these challenges. Like it will be week-long gratitude challenge, week-long yoga challenge, and it will just help people start prioritizing the things in their life that they say are important to them, right? And so breathwork healing sessions too. Breathwork's another powerful, powerful practice. Um, One thing they can do that, you know, I can't teach them right now, but it's really inexpensive that would make a massive impact on them on my website. If you go to online courses, I have an online community, and in the community, if you look, there's a 30-day breathwork challenge, and it teaches you how to, in 30 days, cultivate a daily breathwork for your practice for yourself. And in the first day, you learn breathwork. It's a very specific style of breathwork. There's a lot of different things. If you go to yoga class, I'm sure people listening have been, they've done breath work with you. This is taught by my teacher, guy named David Elliott. It's a really powerful practice, and it clears stuck energy and emotions from inside your body's energy centers, helps to heal trauma. I've been able to help actually a lot of people to bring it back to addiction. I actually think everybody has an addiction, right? I My definition of addiction is any behavior you continue to do despite the fact it brings negative consequences. And I think we all have things like that. But as far as my addiction, heroin, I actually believe this isn't a popular opinion, but my experience, I've worked with thousands of people, is that 99% of people who have opiate addiction have sexual abuse trauma. That was my experience.
Mm,
I think that that is like been true for almost everybody I've worked with across the board. And my teacher, he does a lot of great work in this field, and I've been able to learn from him to help people heal their sexual abuse trauma with breath work. And so breathwork, you can sign up online for a breathwork healing session too, where we could do it on Zoom. And the breathwork healing sessions are super powerful to clear any stuck energy and emotions and trauma that might be stored inside your body. And really, I literally have had people, I had a woman here do breath work with me recently. And sometimes, I've gotten the feedback that one breath work session, which takes about 90 minutes, you're not breathing the whole time we're talking before doing the breath work, then processing through people's emotions afterwards. But I've had the feedback it gave them what 4 years of therapy gave them in one breathwork session. And
mm.
so I would say all that, on the book, right? If you're just dipping your toe in and you're not really sure about this stuff, or it seems like a lot, you could start with the book and then go to my website, georgespeterson.com, my podcast, Global Shift Podcast. I have a daily newsletter too. Like I write about just little antidotes, right, that I've learned, like spiritual teachings on my spiritual and sober journey. It's a few paragraphs to inspire you for your day. It's called George's Daily Motivation. It's free. So if you don't like it, you can just unsubscribe. But that's also a good way. And you actually get, I can send you the link too, because if they sign up, people get 3 free guided visualizations, right? That they can do. They're like 5 minutes. And it's just a nice way to start dipping your toe into this work if you've never really tried any of this stuff before, you're not ready for breath work, or you're not sure you want to learn to meditate yet, and you can start reading just more about the spiritual perspective, and it might, you know, pique your interest in some of this stuff.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much. Having experienced different elements of breath work and meditation, I can speak from my own experience about the power it has had and the impact it's had on my life. So, any of you out there listening, if this is intriguing to you or you want to learn more, you can find George's book on Amazon. All of the information he just shared, I'll make sure it's all in the show notes below so you guys can go ahead and hop on and start following him. George, before we wrap up this conversation, I would just want to finish with a final question. It's a question that I ask all of our authors, and it's about the title of the podcast. So the title is It Just Takes One, because it does. It just takes one book. It just takes one idea, and it can really change a life. But I'm always interested to hear from each of our authors what that term actually means to them. So for you, George, what does it just takes one mean?
Yeah, I love the name of the podcast, by the way. I saw that question when you sent over to me the things you like to talk with your guests about on the podcast. I really like the name of the podcast and that concept, because I think you're right that it does, and I think that For me, just what's coming to me intuitively right now when I think about it just takes one is the idea of just being willing to like listen to one nudge from your heart. Because the thing is that, heart voice, I think, is prompting us all day, right? Uh, and I think for a lot of people, it's glossed over by stress or it's concealed by ego, right? But I think that's also why it's really important to do what I call the inner work. Meditation is just one of those tenets, right? Because that can help to turn up that volume more on our heart voice. I think as we start to hear it more, all it takes in life to really change the way that your life's going is to be willing to follow that heart voice once, right? Because as you start, and it could be in a really small situation, right? I talk about this in the book. I call it taking a mini leap of faith,
Mm,
right? Because I think it's like running a marathon, right? Following your heart. It's like you're not just going to go out and run a marathon or you might hurt yourself. You have to build up to it first. You have to run, a 5K maybe, or even a mile, and then maybe 5 miles, 15, 20, 25. And then once you've run 25 miles, 26.2 miles, a marathon doesn't seem so overwhelming, right? And so I think really what we're looking for is, our path and our purpose, right? I think that's really what we're all looking for in life. And our heart voice knows the way, right? It's the inner GPS, right? And the way it works is that if you start following it in those smaller situations, right? When you go out to eat something small, your heart might say, "Oh, order this thing you've never tried before," right? But the intellect's going to try to override that, like, "No, just go with the whatever that you always order." Right. But if you're willing to just listen to it that one time, right, it starts to get more loud and clear each time that you're willing to follow it. Right. And then if you follow it again, it'll become a little bit more loud and clear, right? In the small situations. And then it will get to the point where then when it tells you like it did me to quit Trader Joe's and go all in on my dream of teaching meditation, you'll be able to follow it because you've been practicing. So I think it just takes one time where you're willing to get out of your comfort zone. That's the biggest thing is like, when it just takes one, it just, for you to grow, right? It just takes 1% of willingness for you to get out of your comfort zone because, right, that's where the growth happens. Nothing grows inside of a comfort zone. And I think that if you don't do anything else, and this is one of the benefits of meditation, it makes it much easier. But in each moment, I believe there's 100 different choices. In 99 will keep us in our comfort zone, and one will get us out. And I think it just takes that one time of you being willing to make that one choice. It's going to force you to get out of your comfort zone that can change the trajectory of your whole life.
amazing. Amazing. I love that. I love that. One nudge from your heart. So true. So true. And one step forward, a little bit uncomfortable, and then it leads to who knows what.
Yeah, and I also thought like it just takes one. You just made me think about this. It just takes like one day if you want to stay sober. Like if somebody's listening to this and they're struggling with something, like you just got to stay sober today. It just takes one day. And then it's like you can worry about staying sober tomorrow, right? And it's like if you just keep it one day at a time, like it really does. I know it's, like a cliche saying that they say in a lot of recovery communities, but it's true. It's like if and then it's cool because you see if you can do it one day then you can actually realize that I can do it forever. I just need to focus on doing it today. Like if I've done it one day before, then I can do it one day tomorrow. Right. But I can't do it if I keep focusing on the future. I just got to focus on today.
Mm. Back to that presence is the greatest gift. Be
Yeah.
present today. Yeah, really.
100%.
George, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to work with you on this project. I'm so happy this book is out. I have already ordered it to give out as gifts to some of the people that I know will get a lot from it. Listeners, I encourage you to read it, go out and get it, follow George, and can't wait to see what happens for you next. George, keep spreading this great message and keep doing the work.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I wouldn't have been able to get that book out, trust me, if you guys hadn't have intervened. So I'm glad that through a set of synchronicities, I found you.
Yeah, same here. Same here. All right, we'll talk soon.
Sounds awesome.